Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the East Meets West Hunt podcast presented by Spartan Forge. On today's episode, I am joined by legendary Western mountain buck hunter Troy Pottinger. Troy hunts some of the wildest country for whitetails in the Rocky Mountains, but his tactics are applicable in many other areas as well. We discuss what elevations to find mountain bucks, food sources in the mountains, grizzly country, breaking down large areas, how to find the perfect tree to set up in, how slope affects buck bedding, logging cuts, weather fronts, summer scouting, and much more. There will be a part 2 of this because this episode went extremely long, full of great information, but I split it up into 2 episodes like I did with Jacob the other week, and that one will be out this week a little bit later here as well. On this week's Mountain Buck Monday Story of the Week, coming to you here on Tuesday on the podcast, it comes from Mark F. out of Pennsylvania. He said, for the last few years, I've been hunting the most remote sections of public land in my part of Pennsylvania. Most of my scouting is done by finding terrain features that will hold deer on topo maps, and then boots on the ground after I identify these areas. After an archery season full of close calls and some missed opportunities, I finally got my buck with the rifle. It was the 3rd time ever in this area, and I found this honey hole thanks to studying topo maps. And such an awesome buck. Looks like an old gnarly mountain buck that Mark shot here in Pennsylvania. If you want to check that buck out, head over to the East Meets West Hunt Instagram or East Meets West Outdoors on Facebook and check it out. Beautiful deer. Congratulations, Mark. And it sounds like you've really got it figured out here in Pennsylvania hunting some of these mountain bucks. So thanks for sharing your story. If you want to share one with me, then send that in to Beau at eastmeetswesthunt.com. And I would love to be able to get to share that with you, or share that with the listeners here, and then everyone also on social media. So definitely send that in if you would. In other news, I got some more hats back in stock. So a lot of people have been taking advantage as I sent that email out and announced it on last week's podcast. I got a lot of new hats in, or I guess hats that have been out of stock are back in stock. And I just got 2 more in, some of the roper hats that people are looking for, the deer camp ropers. Those have been a very popular item. Finally got those back in after ordering them again months ago, but they're back and ready to go. I have one of the new t-shirts on. You can't see the back of it, but it's the new deer camp shirt, which will be coming out in a shirt and a hoodie and then a whole hat line and everything that's going to come with that. But that'll be a little bit down the road here. Just testing some of them out now to make sure that everything is how I like it to be. So and then lastly, if you're listening to this the day that it goes out, so Tuesday, July 19th, then at 7 p.m. Eastern time, head over to my personal Instagram page, which is just at Beau.Martonik. At 7 p.m. Eastern time, we're going to do a Spartan Forge live event. So this will be myself, Andy May, and Garrett Prawl, and we're going to be basically just having almost like a podcast, but we're just going to be talking about some things whitetail hunting related. And this is an opportunity for you to be able to have questions. It's presented by Spartan Forge. People have questions on Spartan Forge, how we're using it. Definitely, ask those questions, or even anything else generally hunting related. If you have something for one of us 3 that are on there, would love to be able to get to talk to you. We'll probably run for about an hour. So definitely jump on that call and, or I guess on that Instagram live and ask your questions and be able to take care of that. So looking forward to being able to do that here tonight, I guess, as this comes out. So looking forward to that. So with that being said, let's go right into part 1 here with Troy Pottinger.
We're live. Troy Pottinger, welcome back to the podcast, man.
Hey, thanks for having me, Beau. It's good to be back. Good to get to talk to you again. It's been a while.
I know. I actually looked back, and the last time that you were on the podcast was like in October of 2020, and I couldn't believe that it was that long because you've been on the show, I think 3 times now at least, and I couldn't believe so much time has passed. But it's good to get to talk to you again.
Yeah, I've been following all your stuff, and I know you've been busy, and of course I've been busy. So it's good to get back together before the season starts here pretty quick, because I think once the season gets rolling, I don't know about you, but it's hard to find me.
Yeah, that's same here, and it's funny. I've been getting out in the woods a little bit here, getting some cameras out and getting some cameras set up and some scrapes built and everything this I don't know, last couple of weeks here. And like first comes like elk season's going to come first for me. I have a Montana tag in my pocket, so I'm going to be going out there, but I can't stop thinking about the whitetails, man. I struggle with that. You're a anomaly, I guess, from being out west. So for anybody that doesn't know or hasn't listened to the other episodes with Troy's from Idaho, and he's one of very few Western hunters that I know that are just fascinated by whitetails and chasing mountain bucks out there in the Rocky Mountains, and does extremely well with it and puts in more work than just about anybody. So it's pretty cool to see you be able to do what you do out there.
Oh, thanks, Beau. Yeah, kind of been a life passion of mine, and yeah, it's crazy. It just every year, I don't know. I'm more excited about it right now than I was when I was 10 years old. So there you go.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, you can hear it. You can hear it in your voice whenever we talk, either on the podcast or we're just on the phone together. Like you just ate up with it and just want to, just continue to learn and doing what we were talking before this. You're going into a new area this year, like actually today, to go scouting, and you're just like, can't wait to see what you turn up.
Yeah, I think that just that whole idea of wondering what's, I live in huge country. I guess I should say I'm afforded the opportunity to get a hunt, probably some of the biggest public land there is in the lower 48. So I've said it before, I'll never cover all the ground that I have access to out here between Eastern Washington, Northern Idaho, Western Montana for whitetails. I'll never cover it all. So it's always a blast just getting into brand new drainages, new country, and picking it apart, just starting with, I always start with maps, but my favorite part's the boots on the ground, where I'm laying it out and trying to get a big picture idea of what all the whitetails are doing in there and get an inventory on what's in there.
Yeah, no, that definitely. And in the country, like when you're saying big country, like it's funny because people that listen to this podcast and they think of, where I hunt and the areas in the Appalachian Mountains is big country, and that is compared to farm country. But then you get out to where you're at, and that's real big country. That's a whole nother world right there.
Yeah, and Beau, you've been out here. You've elk hunted it. You said you're going to be in Montana this fall. You're probably not that far from me. I mean, I don't know where exactly you're going to be in Montana, but yeah, you get out there and elk hunt it. I'm hunting whitetails literally in the same kind of country that you're hunting elk in.
That's so crazy to me that they live in some of those places. And actually, when I was in Montana this spring bear hunting, I ran into someone who listens to the podcast here, and he was out bear hunting and turkey hunting in the mountains there, and he picked up a big shed, a nice shed, about 145-inch whitetail, if he had both sides on it, nice, just typical 5 frame. Yeah. And I was just like, man, that's crazy that they live in some of these areas. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think over the my last 4 decades, I'm in my early 50s, and the last 4 decades, I've actually probably had better luck with my most mature, oldest hermit-like bucks up in that elk range, in that I'd say the middle to the lower elk elevations, just because I think that just because of pressure and population expansion out here, more people hitting the woods, I just think whitetails will always adapt and evolve and move into areas that, especially those older bucks, that really truly give them more quiet, solace, just peacefulness, for them to live out most of their days anyway. So yeah, I've actually moved up in elevation over the years to where now my standard elevation is probably 1,000 feet higher than it used to be 15, 20 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. It's pretty interesting how I've just watched it, felt that I have experienced them moving up. and they're getting him. They're just hanging out right where the muleys are now. I get a lot of mule deer on my cameras now where I'm hunting these where I'm singling out and hunting these older deer.
Really? And so like in those, how do you know how high? I mean, is it just from scouting you can tell how high the whitetails are? Or like, how do you know, like when you're looking at a piece of like, Western mountain country like that, like how do you kind of like gear in on a certain elevation or certain type of area there?
It always starts, Beau, with habitat. You and I both know they have to eat, and they really need good security, wind advantage, and cover because of the predators. But they have to eat well, and they have to eat well year round. So I like to find those elevations that also produce excellent native vegetation for the whiteys just to feed on and hide out in. And a lot of it coincides with big security cover timber stands, massive timber stands.
Yeah, and what I know we talked about this a little though one of the last times we talked, but what are some of those like things that they're feeding on out there? Like what are some of those things that you're keying in on that they tend to feed on?
The early season, believe it or not, I'd say that one of the number one draws, and when you say they, the older bucks, I don't know if they're more human-like than we realize, but they seem to really they really do seem to like to pound the carbs a lot in the mountains and the high country. So some of my best whitetails I find where there's big huckleberry patches close in the early season and high elevation, I believe, because of how hot it is. And there's always water in the norths. So when you factor in real high heat out here, I think, Beau, you've been out here in September before, right?
Yeah.
It can be really hot in September.
All right. So we're back again here. Sorry, there was a little bit. You might hear a little bit of a change in the audio for anybody that's listening. I didn't have my recorder plugged in, and the batteries died, and I lost the first part on there. But I do have the audio from the Zoom call, so it might sound a little bit worse for my part of the recording. But I'll link it together and do my best of editing it here. So sorry about that, Troy. But at least we didn't miss that. You were talking a little bit about some of these older bucks and feeding with the huckleberries and water on those north-facing slopes, if you wanted to kind of continue your thoughts there.
Yeah, and then out here, Beau, I don't know if you've ever been in northern Idaho, up in the Panhandle, but we probably get, I mean, I'd have to look the numbers up, but I'll bet we get 5 times the rain that most of Idaho gets. So it's very, very wet up here. I mean, our spring was just insane the last 3 months, how much rain we get. So all that to say, there's a exorbitant amount of just fresh green grass everywhere in the mountains. And I mean, little shoots of grass that just pop up everywhere. We have real good soil. I believe we have really good soil for mountain soils. I was out on a construction job the other day looking at a job. I'm going to do a bulldozing job. And I was up at 3,000 feet. A guy bought 5 acres, actually my cousin, and he's having me do some road work. But I was looking at the cut bank, and 1.5 to 2 feet of black soil before you get down to the clay and the shale. So this country grows really good native feed from the grasses, all the brush, the ceanosis, the red stem ceanosis out here. You find red stem ceanosis patches, you'll find elk, whitetails, moose, everything. So between that and the, I literally consider it like an ice cream to deer, the huckleberry patches, all the grasses, just the native grasses, and then the browse. The native browse in this country and the amount of different brushes, Beau, it's literally ridiculous. It's hard to explain, but it's just a wall of impenetrable brush in a lot of places for miles. Yeah. And it's all good browse that our whitetails can live in, eat on, and really not even leave a bed all day long if they're, and then maybe slip over to a little draw with water in it. And we have water everywhere. so much water in this country. It's ridiculous. Like, you're not going to find a single water source like you would in southern Idaho that's very island-like. Up here, there's just water in every drainage. And this time of the year, any draw, any type of canyon, any type of ridge system with draws in it has water in it. So they really have everything they need up into the higher elevations.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And what you're talking about, I mean, I imagine they had to have great food sources for, some of the size of the deer that you're able to get. Obviously, genetics play some role in it, but they don't get that big and that healthy without having good food. So that makes sense. I was talking to Justin Holmesworth last night. I don't know if you know Justin from Lone Wolf Custom Gear. He's my buddy out in Ohio, and I'm actually looking at purchasing a piece of property in one of my favorite areas. Actually made an offer on it, so we'll see. Anyway, I was talking to Justin, and you're talking about that feed. I sent Justin, just randomly said, these bucks are all within 50 miles of this location. Well, I sent him like a picture of 6 different bucks within 50 miles of this location that I'm looking at. And it kind of blew me away too. Just the size of the whitetails in the mountains out here that aren't eating ag, that are not living on agriculture. Like, kind of set me back when I sent those pictures to Justin, because Justin sends me back a message. He's like, geez, dude, that's ridiculous. That's ridiculous for public land / no ag, Anyway, but yeah, to speak to your point, 100%, there's really impressive native feed out here for the whitetails in the mountains. Yeah, no, that's it's incredible, because, and the fact that they don't have that ag to be able to go to. I mean, like, I feel like even like you get to places like Ohio and even some of the big woods areas, there's always ag within a certain distance. If there's not a big mass crop, they can kind of migrate down and get to some of those areas. Whereas, where you're at, they're living in the mountains, and that's what they're doing. They're feeding off that browse, and you don't have oak trees or anything, to my knowledge, that you're having any of that mass crop. It's they're browse deer.
Yeah, they're browsers and grass eaters, and yeah, it's there's zero mass crop at all in the mountains. It's just straight browse. So yeah, and they still pack on that size. Now, a lot of my deer, Beau, by January do have to migrate, and then they end up down in the valleys, and they get to eat on some good food sources, including some ag. And when I say migrate, some of the deer are moving 12, 15 miles to get down to the river bottoms to where they can survive the winter. So they do get a shot of that for, say, 2 to 3 months, I would say. Mm-hmm. And then from about January to April, they're really pushed down low in elevation. A lot of times they end up in some agriculture country, so that probably doesn't hurt either when they're starting to grow everything. Mm-hmm. It probably doesn't hurt that they get to those minerals, they get to that soil, that they get to that good food too, and then they move back up into the mountains for the summer and the fall and the early winter.
Yeah, and I guess at that point too, they can help recoup their bodies down there. After the beginning of the winter and the rut and all those different things, they can go down there and get some good food and everything. But it's kind of crazy to hear that they migrate that far. We might see bucks here in Pennsylvania that'll go 6-7 miles at most, but you're typically not seeing them go, a dozen miles or so to move. And we don't have the elevation that they really need to, to get away from things. They might go to a better food source in those heavy winter months. And do you, so one of the things that I'm curious about, and I think I kind of know the answer to it, but when you look at the mountains, there's not whitetails in all of the mountains in the Rockies. They seem to be in some particular locations. Is it because that country is so thick that it has all that browse, whereas you look at like a lot of other traditional elk country that it is more open underneath that timber? Do you kind of contribute that to where you find them?
Yeah, the whitetails, I always find them where, I always said it to my son my whole life. When you get into the thick country where the browse is there and where the security cover's there, that's where you start running into the whitetails up to 6,000 feet. Now, is there a lot of whitetails at that elevation at 6? No. But up to 6,000 feet, that's pretty much the cutoff line that I have found. But it's 100% going back to what you asked me earlier, habitat. That habitat has to be there, and then the whitetails will move into it. If the habitat, meaning the vegetation, security cover, the wind advantage from predators, it all plays into one. When they get into those ridges and up on those mountainsides, you know, those thermals and wind or those thermals and prevailing wind directions keep them alive throughout the year. And they're always, I mean, lions and wolves on their tail all the time. Mountain lions are the worst, closely followed by wolves if you have wolves in a drainage. So yeah, they're bouncing too. They're bouncing, Beau. They don't just sit in one spot or they're sitting duck. They have to move around, and I often have to really lay out a huge area to pick up where the target bucks I'm after will move to if they get bumped by big predator situations.
Okay, so you have the area kind of laid out as like backup things. You start picking up some wolves on your cameras, something like that, and the bucks aren't showing up. It's like, all right, let me go check this area that I scouted out that I think maybe they could be moving to. And that's a whole different world, being able to have that. Do you deal with grizzlies much?
I do, Beau, in some of my areas, yes. The spot I'm going in today is heavy grizzly country. So that's another factor that for a person that's never hunted in grizzly country, and maybe you have, Beau, when you're elk hunting, I'm not sure. But that's a whole different piece of the equation of what we're doing that you really got to factor in. You know, when you're walking in at, I don't know, an hour before daylight and wanting to get to a stand for a morning sit, and maybe you're trying to catch a big buck ascending back up the mountain towards his bed. You're out in the middle of nowhere of the mountains, and you're walking in the dark for an hour with a headlamp to get to your stand, and you're walking in on grizzly country. I'm telling you, it's different. It'll make the hair on the back of your neck stand up when a bear crosses in front of you, or you hear something rustling in the brush on the way to those tree stands, and coming out in the dark. And when you kill something and you got blood all over, and you know, I bone everything out. I haven't packed bones out of the backcountry for probably 2 decades.
Yeah.
So I'm always boning everything out and getting it in my pack. And a big whitetail buck usually takes 2 trips for me. You know, and a lot of times I'm down in elevation from where I parked. I'm way down in on big ridges because most people don't want to pack stuff uphill. So I kind of play that game. But all that to say, yeah, in the grizzly country, you completely prepare differently. I always have a sidearm. Pack the bear spray too. I mean, I'm just always ready because they don't give you much time. If you walk up on a sow and cubs, and I've walked up on sows and cubs before, and they don't take kindly to you in this country because they fear nothing. They've never been hunted. So they just do what they want, and they do not fear humans.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and because they're not able to be hunted, so it's like why they have nothing to be feared of as far as from a human perspective. And I can't like, so I've dabbled in some grizzly country. I can't say that I've spent a ton of time in there, but it's a different level of awareness walking in the dark. Especially, you know, you're going into a whitetail stand and you're going in there, you know, by yourself, and you're going in the dark with a headlamp. You know, most of the time when I'm elk hunting, I'm always with somebody, which adds a little bit of that security to you. But I bet that there's not too many other things that you can do in life that gives you better awareness than doing that.
No, you want to talk about having your head on a swivel, and all of your senses are in tune with what's going on around you. Absolutely. Like, you got to have you got to have your shit wired tight when you hunt grizzly country. And if you don't, you might be flirting with disaster when it comes to grizzlies, because I mean, you just got to have your head on straight, paying attention, and And thank God, I mean, knock on wood, because I'm going into grizzly country today, but thank God that I've never had a real bad incident at all. Probably the most nerve-wracking thing I've ever done is rode up on one on my e-bike and met it right in the middle of a logging road in the spring. Like, came around the corner and there it was, and it stood up on its hind legs. That's probably the closest. Yeah, and I was probably 25 feet from it.
Oh my, I could not imagine that. You come around a bend and you see that thing.
Yeah. I'm on my e-bike, which the e-bike makes no noise, so it didn't hear me coming.
Yeah.
I was not expecting it in this area. Yeah. And same with black bears too. And for whatever reason, and maybe it's just a psychological thing. Now it is. It's partly that, but black bears run from us. They get hunted by hounds out here. They get hunted hard. Grizzlies just, when you get into grizzly country, they just look at you different. I mean, they just flat out do whatever the hell they want. They're kind of like a moose out here that doesn't get hunted very hard. You know, we have very few draws on the moose. Moose just kind of walk through and do what they want to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And so, okay, so obviously, you know, with these areas, with all the predators and stuff that you have, and that's adding a whole nother level of complexity to it. But I'm curious to, like, okay, so let's just talk a scenario base. Like today, you're going into new country. What's your game plan look like? What are you going in and doing here in the summer as you're going in to scout one of these areas?
So about probably 2.5, 3 months ago, Beau, I started. Based on a shed antler find. I think you and I talked about it before we started the podcast. Based on a tremendous shed antler find, it wasn't mine, but the person that found it is a bear hunter and does not care a whole lot about whiteys. Basically, a few months ago, sat down on the maps of the area, laid it all out, looked at all the topography, broke it all down. I broke down about a 10-mile square area on maps. And I looked at all the topography, obviously pinpointed some excellent elevations and topographical features that I like when it comes to whitetails. And then the key is always overlaying it with that Google Earth. Google Earth is probably the best because you can zoom in, look at the habitat, tilt it, turn it, really look at how the land lays. And then you look at all your access points and where everybody else can hunt. And then based on where that shed antler was sitting, and we literally got to see exactly where the shed was laying, where it got picked up, we just fanned out from there. And it's a buddy of mine and I are doing this. We fanned out from there and we got 1, 2, 3, 4 drainages, different drainages, watersheds, with big ridge, long ridges in between. And what we're doing, Beau, is laying out a big trap line of cameras through all these drainages at 2 different levels of elevations that I really like and that he likes. And then we're just going to let the cameras tell us what's going on in there. And of course, most people know that I like to hunt scrapes. So at every camera, we're building a big scrape, or we're finding, the very first time we went in on the second spot that we had picked on a map, it had a giant scrape right where we expected it. So when we find what should be there, we overmark it. If we don't find the type of scrape we want, where we want to lay a camera out based on habitat, terrain, and all the breakdown, then we build one. And then we're throwing cameras on those scrapes for inventory right now. And we're literally going to go check some cameras today. And we're going to put in probably 3 or 4 new synthetic scrapes.
Okay. And what and I know we've talked about this before too, but I do want to ask again, like if you're going to build a scrape in an area, what are you looking for out there as far as like, all right, this is a place that I want to build a big scrape? Is that something that you find like correlations between, or is it something that you kind of just you come across and you just recognize it?
If I want to build one, if I want to build a mock, is that what you're asking, Beau? If I want to build one?
Yeah.
I always have to have, when I get there, when I get to the spot, and I'm glad you brought this up. I did a boot camp on Saturday, whitetail boot camp. And I always start the boot camp off with all the intel, all the in-classroom layout of basically the breakdown of how you find a mountain buck. And I teach people how to find them first based on maps and all that. But the key to the boot camp is when I take the guys to the woods for the second half of the day. And you're asking me, this question will totally be answered here by how this works. I talk to guys all the time. I say, when you get to a spot that you really like, and when you visually check it out and you see what you need to see, you see the habitat, you see the security cover, I said, you got to spend at least an hour there testing the wind. And I always get being a teacher for 28 years, I pick up on body language big time. So I always get, when I'm in the classroom setting talking about it, it's kind of like being in school. Until you actually have kids go out and do the hands-on experience and feel it, sense it, and really get a feel for it, people roll their eyes a little bit, and they're just like, what the hell? So you take these guys out after you teach all the intel, and then you go practice it and you put it to practice. Well, I took these guys out the other day onto this cool little ridge, really good spot actually, and close enough to my home and a place where we've killed some tremendous deer in the past. And I took them in on kind of the 2/3 of the way up this mountain. And I took them in on this ridge, and I got to a spot, and I expected a scrape to be there. And I hadn't been in there in about 10 years. I've been hunting different areas and a little higher above it, but I hadn't been to this specific spot in about 10 years. And when I walked in there, sure enough, just like it showed on the maps, there should have been a scrape in there because of the edge, the habitat edge that was in there, the bench that was in there. There was a little scrape. And all the guys started kind of getting excited. And then I said, okay, now just stand here and feel the thermals and feel the wind. Well, guess what the wind and the thermals did at that location? Swirled, kicked all over. And I said, guys, here's what happens to whitetail hunters all the time. You get in, you get excited, you see a beautiful location, you see a beautiful stand of trees, heavy security cover right up against a 40 or 50-year-old clear cut that's been regrown, so it's all reprod, so it's just thick, trails everywhere, even in the grass. And the grass is 1.5 feet tall. And you could see where deer are walking through here, and there's a scrape there that they used last fall. But the wind's terrible. The thermal's horrible. So I said, all right, let's move up to this next level where the crest of this bench will be on top of it and we'll get a more consistent wind. So we moved 100 yards. Guess what was up at 100 yards above that?
Another big scrape.
Huge community scrape. We stood there. I made them stand there, feel the wind, pick out a kill tree that would work for entrance and exit. I laid it all out for them, but I made them base it on the thermals and the wind. Just 100 yards away, Beau, made all the difference. Guess what the wind did for us up on that crest?
More consistent. Perfect. Yeah.
It worked incredibly consistent with the thermal and the prevailing. And the prevailing that is in there is about a 75% huntable stand. Versus if we would have set up down on the other great looking spot, 100 yards down the ridge, you'd be in a mess. You'd literally educate every deer in there. So just breaking that down for those guys and really teaching them to be patient and break the wind down and take the time to break the wind down. Then I made them walk over. I had them, not made. I asked them, I said, now what we got to do, guys, is anytime you set up, in my opinion, why waste your time if you can't hunt it? So if I'm going to put a camera on this existing community scrape that's there, I'm going to make sure there is a hangable set area to hunt and an entrance and exit. So I had them circle all the way around all of that. We picked out a tree that made the most sense, had the best cover, 22 yards off the scrape, and we had an unbelievable draw behind it and an entrance and exit from the east, which everybody knows out west, you get all south and west winds mostly. And we were able to carve out, and those guys got to feel it, see it, sense it. They were able to carve out what a true, not fully bulletproof, but very bulletproof stand set would be over that scrape. And I had so much feedback from the guys. They're just like, I never, ever thought about breaking it down this way, Troy, and taking the time to break it down, because they all would have just hunted down at that first one. And they would have hung a set there and been excited about the wagon wheel trail down there. But it's the wrong spot, and it's only 100 yards away. So by the time we left, Beau, we'd been in there 2 hours, 2.5 hours actually, in a 100-yard, 150-yard circle, breaking it all down. We even went and found our entrance and exit that would work perfect, where we could park a half a mile away on the east side of the mountain and come in and really never cross many deer. Anyway, so to answer your question, Beau, I kind of got off on a tangent there, but
no, that was perfect.
Just taking that time to decipher the wind and the thermals is key to being a consistent killer, in my opinion, in the mountains. Obviously, the deer have to be there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hung a camera on it, and it'll have I purposely went in there and hung a camera because I have a really nice whitetail on that mountain that made it to 5 years old this year. And I think I can pick him up at this location now. So 10 years later, after not hunting that spot, I finally have a buck in there that I really like. I really like it for my son, Jess, my oldest boy, actually, my bass fisherman that doesn't get a lot of time to hunt. I'm actually setting it up for him to kill that deer there.
And what one of the things that you had said there, I think is super important, is the fact that when you found that sign, you took all that time to break down all the scenarios. And I feel like many people, when they go and they go scouting, they find this good sign, they mark it, and they move on. And it's like, that's, I was talking to my cousin Mason about it the other day. He's like, when I find a spot that I like, he's like, it takes me a couple hours to look at all the scenarios. What's the right tree? How am I going to set up in this? How am I going to access it? And thinking of all those things, because you don't want to be thinking about that right at the time that you're trying to hunt. And you can always say you're going to come back later, and you never do. So, you rarely do, I guess. So it's important, like when you find that stuff, just to spend that time and checking out the wind and thermals and being able to figure out how that's going to interact, because we get a lot of those situations here where you get like a hub spot or like a bowl, basically. It comes down, and where all these drainages kind of run into one spot, there's always a big ass community scrape there. But it's very situational whether you can hunt it. If it's too steep coming in, it's just constantly swirling those winds, and it's not really huntable. Whereas, if you were just to look at that sign, it'd be like, yeah, this is where I should be at, but until you kind of sit there and you throw some milkweed out, or even just feeling it, a lot of times you can be able to determine that this probably isn't a huntable spot. But maybe if you work, in one direction or the other, and kind of cover those little other, tiny points or ridges that lead into it, you can find a spot that's huntable, and you're still technically hunting that scrape, but not at that scrape.
Right.
Know, do you find that too with like some of those hub areas? Do you find scrapes in those areas?
Beau, that's exactly what we ran into is a scrape and a scrape about 100 yards apart. But the second one was way more conducive for us to kill at. Mm-hmm. And the first one looked incredible when you saw the wagon wheel trails. But again, all the guys that I was with got excited on the first one, and they thought it was incredible. And there was actually, the trails were actually more defined down there, but the wind is just a killer, and the thermal's a killer with the wind there. But yes, bump up. Basically, what we're both saying here is when you're out there in the mountains, you're trying to kill a big whitetail. Why would you not put yourself in the most opportunistic place to kill him when you can pull it? It's easy to pull a buck 100 yards. Yeah. Big whitetail, a big scrape, it's easy to pull them 100 yards. If you're trapping whitetails like I do with scrapes, they're going to check both. They're not just going to check one. And, that's all the difference sometimes for guys that struggle, is just not taking the time to be an extremist with how the wind works for the deer in that area. And the whitetails that I hunt have to have good wind, or they're wolf shit if they're not. That's just the way it is. A lion's going to kill them. So they live by the wind out here. So that's the game I play, is the the wind has to be great for them, and I'm able to slide in on the edge of it and backdoor, come in from the back door, so to speak, and not cross them hardly at all. Now, do all whitetails follow a perfect script? Does a whitetail walk down my entrance and exit trail every now and then? Sure, but not very often.
Yeah.
But it's because I'm putting a lot of time and thought into the big picture of how they use that area.
You know, and there's so many from doing this podcast and talking to numerous really good whitetail hunters. The best of the best pay attention to access. So just like to just incredible amount of detail, like yourself, Nathan Killen, whenever I talk to him, and others that just like they look at the access just as much as they're looking at that good sign and that scrape and everything as far as being able to get in there. And I know like last year, my opening day Pennsylvania buck, I was like, that was the biggest thing. I could have accessed that spot in probably a 3/4 of a mile walk. But if I knew that if I were able to use this creek system and walk that up the drainage essentially and be able on the opposite side and then cross over, and then I actually walked like right on the bank because I didn't want to cross these trails that were coming down this drainage to get up into my tree. Like those little details matter, because if I would have walked up that trail coming in, he might have got a whiff of that or did so, and not even had a shot opportunity. And I think that's and as I was talking to Jacob on the podcast when I was recording one with him yesterday, we were talking about it's really difficult for most people, including myself at times, as the season goes on, to start getting a little bit lazy with those things, and it's you have to be kind of constant in your head. And like my what I tell myself is like, just every time it's like, you just got to do this one time right and it'll work out. But you just keep telling yourself every time. It doesn't always happen that day, but with that mentality, you can be more disciplined, I guess, with it.
Yeah. And one thing I was teaching the guys at the camp too, just to add to that, is you even have to visualize in your mind your access trail to that stand and purposely put your footsteps to your stand to get into it, so that you can turn around in your tree stand. If you do have a buck that you want to kill, come in behind you before they cross your trail. You can kill them either side of it. And I was showing those guys that, and I made them all walk it with me. And every guy, there was 12. I keep my boot camps at about 12 guys, so it doesn't get too big.
Yep.
So that I have a lot of one-on-one time. But I had every guy walk through the tall grass, and I showed them, this is how you need to walk into the stand and why. And then when we got to the tree that was by far the best tree to kill out of, the tree was the ugliest tree there, but it was the best tree to kill out of, Beau. And that's where I got to talk to them about equipment and versatile, equipment that can get you in an ugly tree and still keep you straight and allow you to hunt that spot more than one time. But walking those guys in and explaining to them, you always have to be able to shoot your back trail just in case before a buck crosses it. That made a lot of sense to them too, once I got to show it to them, and they had to walk it with me. And they were looking up at the kill tree the whole time. And then it made all the sense in the world, the path that I purposely, deliberately walked in on, that I picked out of my head based on what the wind was doing, my entrance and exit, how to climb into that tree, still kill everything on both sides of me behind me before it crossed me.
Yeah, that's a really important little detail there. And but before I forget, I next year I want to come out to one of your camps, because I think in the next year or so I want to go do one of those hunts, a western whitetail mountain hunt. I've been talking to you about it for a few years now, but it's coming to that time now where I need to make that happen, because it just seems to be like it would be a blast, and there's no better teaching element. I mean, you can listen to podcasts, you can do that, but that in-person part of like you showing those people in the field, like that'll stick in their mind forever. It's one thing to hear something, but when you show them something, and that's the same thing when I did my scouting camp this year. That was like the feedback I got was like, man, this either confirmed what, I thought, by going out and looking, or like, wow, okay, this is the little details you look at here, and explain like going up. And we were on a piece of private big woods ground. So the sign was more prevalent, I guess. So it was easy to get like really excited. I'm like, okay, yeah, we found this sign, but let's go a little bit further and let's look at this and how this lays out, and, you know, dropping the milkweed and seeing how that worked. And it's having that in person, it's you're able to see that a little bit better.
Yeah, I had to add to what you're saying. I agree with you 100%. The kinesthetic side of learning is, you think about when we were all in school. That whole kinesthetic side of learning is where it's at. When you walk people through it and they get to sense it with all their senses, it just sticks with them. And it's interesting. I had Josh LeVar down here from Alberta, Canada. He came to my boot camp, and Josh killed the biggest buck of his life last year. Basically, he says it, using a lot of my tactics and techniques with scrapes, but also paying attention to detail. And he was down here, and Josh was great. He's a really sharp guy. I mean, I just picked up on it right away how sharp he is. And I had him, like, you know, I've known Josh enough that I said, you know, bring your windicator with you, bring your milkweed with you. So it was kind of cool. While I was teaching, Josh was kind of my helper. I just kind of threw him into it with me, and he loved it because he was popping the milkweed for me and showing everybody as I spoke. So he just like jumped right in, and, you know, and then he was using that as a visual for these guys. And they were all just blown away at, more than anything, how overlooked the wind is. And we're talking wind and thermals mixing, and showing those guys where you can find some consistency in the mountain. That really helped. And I got a ton of feedback this time from the majority of the participants at the boot camp. They were just like showing us where we could see the difference in terrain that actually makes a difference with the wind. That was crucial to them. And I kept hearing guys saying, man, I'm doing this all wrong. Or, yeah, I'm really close on this. I just need to be more selective. You know, I heard all these different comments from the guys. And the best part is I get a million questions out there, which when guys are asking questions, they're learning. You know? Yeah. So no, it was really cool, and most importantly, every one of those guys would be a little better whitetail hunter if they decide to adhere to those disciplines.
Yeah, no, and another point that you had brought up too is like, in anybody that's listened to you in any sort of fashion understands how, you know, you are with scrapes, and when you say trapping whitetails, you're talking about your scrape regimen and being able to pull them. Like, say for example, like that spot you were looking at, I don't know the exact scenario, but you're saying that there was a real good one down below and one up high, and I'm assuming, you know, with the way that you're able to freshen up that scrape and doctor it up, that you can make that like the primary spot to be able to do that and essentially, you know, trap those whitetails. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's a primary daylight. I think it was that spot, that specific spot. It always starts with wind and thermals works there. The kill tree setup was incredible because it had multiple trees kind of behind it for cover. A guy wouldn't have to hunt that high there with the way the wind was working. A guy could hunt high if he wants to get out of the crook of the ugly tree was crooked, but it's the right tree to kill out of. So I talked to the guys all about that, but the access was incredible. And the habitat around it, Beau, guaranteed that the bucks would bed kind of at a 45 up above and work their way down to that spot, that kill tree. And it would be a daylight. That's the key. Sign is cool, but until you determine whether or not the sign that you're seeing is daylight frequency, the frequency of the daylight attendees is high, then you're kind of wasting your time too. Once you confirm all of that, and when you can see that a mature target buck that you're after will use it in the daylight, that tells you everything when it's a 5 or a 6-year-old buck or older, because that tells you, the hunter, that he is so comfortable there versus a lot of other places on the mountain. And that's where you got to hone in on. It's easy to find beautiful sign, but you got to make sure it's daylight frequency sign.
Yeah, and another point about like when you're talking about like finding those areas that they'll go in daylight and them bedding, you said maybe you were assuming these bucks would be bedding at a 45 up a little bit above. Do you find that like, okay, is that going to be a better spot in the morning all day that they might come out and check that, or the evening? What and then why? Like if you were looking at that and assuming without
Right.
intel at that, how would you look at that?
I look at it, Beau, when I see the security cover that I want to see with ample available feed immediately right there and a ton of security cover. And anytime I can see a face of a mountain that's steep that goes up with all that cover, I can almost guarantee you the bucks are on that face because of the wind and thermals. They got all the feed they need right there close. I'm hunting tight to bedding areas. Now, tight in the mountains is a couple 100 yards.
Yeah.
That's real close. Nothing for a buck to walk 200 yards, 150 yards. You start getting much closer than that out here, and it's in my opinion, much easier to spook a mountain buck than a buck that's used to people. A buck that's hunted by predators is easy to spook because he'll bump even on the odd noise, thinking it might be a bear, it might be a lion, it might be a wolf too. All that to say, yeah, I have to see everything in place for a buck to have very survivable, good bedding before I even want to dive into it. I hunt very close to beds for mountain bucks. Bedding me. I'm always near the beds. That way I'm in the game, Beau, in the early season. I'm still in the game all during the rut because I got those does hitting those community scrapes. And then the late season, I'm always in the game too because I'm close to beds. So that's the game I play, and I move on them when I need to. And I'll build a mock and throw it right in their face if I need to. If they move on me, I'll find their bedding zone and I'll move in on it, use the mock scrape or an existing if there's already one there, but I'll usually build a mock and I'll throw that scent at them and pull them. And usually pick up all the does in the area too when I move on them. I don't know if that answered your question perfectly, but yes, I have to see everything I need, including being close to bedding and good feed and water. And slope is huge too. We don't talk enough about slope. A lot of whitetails have to have certain slope and be up on a slope high enough to get what they need for wind to survive.
What kind of slope are you? Is there like do you have a specific degree or something that you're looking for, or a range in slope where you think it's ideal for bedding?
Yeah, I have found that my whitetails in the mountains, degree wise, let's just say real steep.
Real steep, yeah.
Let's just say, Beau, when I get up on ridges that have benches that lead to a big steep face that's just covered in extremely thick security cover and a lot of feed, there'll almost always be a big whitetail bedded on it. So I like this, and this is why. That steepness gives them the high ground. It gives them the daily thermal. It gives them the downhill thermal at daylight to ascend to. It gives them everything they need to get up high, lay down for the day, and use the prevailing winds and the thermals to either roll over their back and give them scent to their backside or the thermal in their face. And I usually find that those big bucks, and I've watched them in heavy clear cuts when I'm on top of them in tree stands, say 100 or say a quarter mile away. I've glass bucks doing this. They'll come on a ridge and just go over the edge of it, and they'll lay down and face the thermal. And then the prevailing wind a lot of time will kick over the back of their head or at a 45. So they're getting both. They're getting everything they want, even at their backside where they position their body. I see that a lot. And a lot of times too, on those steep faces or those steep hillside, mountainsides, Beau, there's a lot of blowdowns. So it's like toothpicks of trees everywhere that they work their way down through, and they'll lay down in the thick. And something that tries to walk up on them or get to them predator-wise is going to have a hard time without making a bunch of noise too. Yeah, so that a lot of steep stuff. I'm positioned close to a lot of steep faces and slopes. Yes.
So you're typically setting up on kind of like a little bit of a flatter bench or something that's surrounded by that steep stuff. And and
Where
you know, and a lot of the ways you just explained that is very similar to the the mountain whitetails that we have in the east as far as the bedding, where they go just down over that ridge and either find a big tree or blow down or whatever to be able to have that prevailing wind coming over their back, having those thermals coming up. It's just a bulletproof setup to be able to get into.
Yep. Yeah. And there's a reason why. I mean, obviously, if you and I were trying to evade apex predators daily, those animals are in tune with what's going on in the wind. And I don't know how thick it is out there where you're at, Beau, but my whitetails in a lot of places cannot see past 50 yards where they bed down, they might not see past 15 yards because it's so thick. Now, when all the leaves come off and we get to November, then it opens up a little more because all of our brush, we lose all the leaves. And all of our brush is that 3 feet to 10 foot high range. Mm-hmm. And then the big timber all around it. It's just it's like a carpet in the forest. And then big timber, heavy coniferous forest canopy above it.
Do you find those bucks shifting bedding at all once those leaves come off, or is it still, because it's still thick, that it doesn't matter? How do you look at that?
I do, Beau. As soon as all the leaves come off and the hunting pressure's been applied for about 2 months, late October is when we lose most of our leaves out here. What I find, and I almost always have to move on bucks for the middle of November into the late season past the rut December hunts, I'm always moving the majority of time higher before the heavy snows get here. I see them move higher, steeper, thicker, and they'll hide out in the norths if they have to until the snow gets deep enough that it'll push them out in January. But by that time, the season's over.
Yeah.
So I usually end up hunting the highest, Beau. 2 scenarios. Real early when it's hot as hell and they want to be cool, I'll be at my highest elevations with bucks that are totally nomadic by themselves, 100% hermits. And then real late, Beau, when all the pressure of all the hunting seasons have pushed bucks into what I call their hideouts late season. In between, I'm moving around with them as they transition and position themselves for the big scraping checks and phase, the actual seeking, and then the breeding phase. So I'm really bouncing around trying to stay ahead of specific bucks at different zones of where they need to be for that time of the year. And the feed moves them too. The native feed transitions in and out. So I got to bounce with that too.
I'm sure like the grass is obviously the grass is probably burn up and dry out and whatever, and they're not green anymore as the season goes on, which changes it a little bit. Yep. The woody browse will probably stay the same for the most part. And that's probably, later in the season, that's probably a really good thing because that's what's going to be left as far as not having some of the huckleberry bushes and things like that. If I'm thinking about that right.
No, you're right on. You're spot on. The woody browse, like the Ceanosis and the ocean spray and all that, they just hammer that stuff. I would say mid-October, it's still pretty green. That's another thing, Beau. You think of the West, everything burns up. Well, I live in this pocket that is very green because of the rain, the precipitation that we get. So we actually hang on to a lot of green, I would say, until the middle of November. Okay. And then it really turns off. I'd say middle of November, and then it goes to all browse. Browse feeding. Yeah. And then I play that game of Ceanosis patches. Red stem Ceanosis, look it up. That's where we find our sheds. Why do we find our sheds in it? Because that's what they're feeding on in that late season. And it's all browse. And it's elk and deer and moose, all 3 species, one of their favorite food sources when it starts to get cold and the leaves are off.
That makes a lot of sense. And so, and I guess I wasn't thinking about again, my experience with Idaho has not been even near where you're at. So like, as I'm looking at, that's a little more drier climate and things brown up earlier. I was seeing some of the green stuff browning up at the end of September as it was leading in October in some of those areas that didn't have as much water as where you're at. But obviously with basically kind of being the Pacific Northwest, you're probably getting more rain and having some more water in those mountains.
Yeah, it's dang like I swear to God, it feels like a rainforest up here sometimes.
Yeah,
I can't usually hunt 1 week without getting rained on ever. Like there's never a full week of, okay, early season maybe. Once I get to October, middle, even late September, you're going to get rained on once or twice a week. We had a drought last year, probably the worst drought we've had in years. So that was different. That was really different hunting. Everything was, they didn't even want us in the mountains hardly because they're afraid of forest fires. We're kind of back to a real wet, normal pattern this year. I think the early archery season is going to be incredible because of the rain that we've had, and the feed that's out there is just unbelievable this year. So I'm pretty excited for opening day and trying to kill a big velvet again. It's been a while since I've killed a velvet, and I want to kill one this year.
Oh, that'd be sweet. And I want to dive a little bit more into talking about the bedding there, and talking about them being that thick cover where they can't see very far. And I think that's one thing that when we're talking about eastern whitetails that can go back and forth, it really depends on the habitat. For me personally, I think these bucks like to have that visual, but when I say visual and anybody talks about visual, it doesn't mean like they can see 200 yards. Sometimes it can be 30 yards that they're being able to see out in front of them, but it gets them just enough to be able to have that security with that stuff to their back. But there are areas that are more that don't have logging, and it's just more big timber type stuff that they'll use basically more thermals and visual advantage than anything, which is a little bit different than where you're at, but it really depends on that area. And you had mentioned about the logging cuts there. Do you focus on those as much as we do out here in the East?
I focus on the old ones, Beau, that have been planted and have regrown. I really like those 40, 50-year-old regrowths.
What's the reason for that?
It is 40, 50 years ago, even 30 years ago, the way the planting was done, they've changed it a lot since then because of timber species and genetics of timber nowadays. It grows faster. But in the old days, they planted stuff very close together. So it just turns into, those older clear cuts are my favorite because they turn into an impenetratable bedding area. Mm-hmm. You try to walk in and hunt them, you're wasting your time. You're blowing deer out. I hunt in the big timber right on the edges of those, and they're so grown up, Beau, that most people don't even notice what they're looking at. I like to get right on that inside edge at the right elevations with the right topography up against those older cuts that serve as unbelievable bedding for the best deer. And that's where I find a lot of my big bucks bedding is they'll go into one of those 40, 50-year-old cuts that's just loaded with regrowth. Trees about that big around, 25, 35 feet tall now, 40 feet tall. And it's just a gnarly, thick mess. But they can bump out into the big timber, cruise the ridges, check the scrapes, feed all over real close to it. And I'll move in, set up on those edges of those old cuts because I know a lot of my best bucks will bed in those. And it's almost always, Beau, it's usually almost always on a steep mountain face where they've had to yard. You know what yarding is when it comes to logging, where they use the big towers?
Yeah.
And where they pull all the logs because it's so steep you can't use a dozer to skid it. Mm-hmm. Those old cuts, those old steep mountain face cuts that have all that regrowth in it and been replanted are incredible bedding.
Yeah, because you're getting best of both worlds there, like you were talking about earlier with the slope, and then you're having that cover mixed in with it, and it's just like the the best case scenario for it. And I like, what you're saying there is you being just off it, like you're in a huntable location because you can't probably hunt them, that close to that bedding, and you probably don't know exactly where they're bedding in it. Like, it's not like it's, I don't know. Do you find like singular beds much, or are they mostly just like an area that you're like, they're bedding in this area?
I do, Bo. I do go into those suckers. I'll go into them. When I say when they're really hard to penetrate, what I mean is when we have all the green up.
Yeah.
There's so much brush in them for feed. It's unbelievable. But in the spring, April, May, March, if I can get to them based on the snow levels, I usually can't. I will walk those and find last year's depressions of beds in those. And what I find with them at my mountain bucks is like say a big hermit like I had a huge buck that I was hunting a couple years ago, and he was living in one of those, and I was very close to him. And when I went in the year after I first found where he was bedding and was trying to kill him that year, and never did get a shot at him. When I went in there in the spring after knowing where he was and having him on camera at my stand and trying to kill him, there was multiple years of bedding and rubs in that thing, and I could only walk it in April. By May and June, it was so greened up and so thick, it just walking through this, like walking through a jungle. So I got in there and I walked it, and I've done that quite a bit. In the springtime, I walk those thick areas. Every now and then I'll pick up a shed if they shed early. Usually they're too high in elevation, so my bucks are gone before they shed out of those. But no, to answer your question, what I find is beds all over in it. And it's a big area. It might be 100-acre, 200-acre cut.
Yeah.
What I find is the bucks go up in there and bed where they want to for the day, usually based on the best wind or thermal, and they don't always lay in the same bed. No, I don't believe that with mountain bucks. They have to kind of bed around in a zone to protect them the best. They're kind of a sitting target if they bed in one bed all the time to predators.
Yeah, especially where you're at there. And I found that so much with areas that have cuts like that too. I don't really focus on like finding a specific bed and thinking that deer's there all the time. I found it in areas that are like old growth timber, Appalachian mountain country, where there's some really defined ridge systems. You might find some more consistent bedding and some really wore down beds there. But like where I'm finding in areas with a bunch of the logging cuts, it's like I basically look at that cut as like, this is a bedding area for it, and I'm going to work around it and figure out where I can kill on it and not worry so much about the exact location where I think he's bedding, because I feel like you can really chase your tail doing that sometimes.
Yeah, and I always try to set up to where I love that he's bedding up in there. I don't care if he beds 50 yards that way, 60 yards up, 80 yards up. I know he's over in that cut somewhere. I just make sure that where I'm set up, I can pull him from any of those directions without the wind working at him, meaning from where I'm setting versus my scrape will have the thermal working towards him. I'll be set up in some type of wind edge or wind tunnel that protects me from all of my scent working at him. That's what I strive for, and it's not easy. That's not easy to always find. Usually what I end up doing is referring back to what you said earlier. A lot of times I'm walking up a creek bottom, deep ravine, popping up onto the edge of a bench, literally sitting on the edge of the bench and having everything out beyond me. And I've got a thermal draft down that creek bottom because there's a creek there and there's cool water, and I got a thermal draft that sucks right back down. Those for me are prime setups in the mountains. When I can come in laterally, usually come in from the east always. I'd say 90% of my tree stands are set up in some eastern fashion, or where I'm going to hang and hunt. I'll always set up east of where I think I'm going to kill. Almost always. Now, do I have setups or do I move and hang and hunt when there is an east wind? Absolutely. There's places I have 2 tree stands set up so that when I do get that odd east wind, I can still hunt that deer. And I'll only do that, Bo, on a tremendous buck that I'm honing in on and want to kill. Mm-hmm. Well, I go to those extensive double sets and things like that. Another thing I'm playing with now is tree stand set in the most conducive, best place to try to kill over one of my scrapes, but I'm also incorporating ground blinds now in the worst wind advantage spot because I can conceal my scent. And when I get like an east wind one day, I'll go jump in that ground blind, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense. And did you leave that ground blind there? Like you set it up ahead of time?
And to be fair to your listeners, I'm not hunting deer. I'm hunting a deer. So yes, if I'm hunting a specific buck, I'll leave it on him, brush it in. I'm really starting to play with that a lot more because you can really knock your scent down in a blind. And my favorite times to hunt out of a blind are on the shittiest, nastiest, rainy, snowy days when the scent's getting knocked down good anyway. The wind is not great for the tree stand setup or where I would hang a stand. That ground blind on a specific buck is pretty wicked option to have. And obviously I'll put it in early on a specific buck because he is monitoring and addressing my community scrape a lot. That's when I'll move one in and set it up. And that's been a lot of fun. I've been tinkering with that the last couple of years, just having that option. Or on a terrible weather day where you don't want to sit in a tree in 30-mile-an-hour winds or 20-mile-an-hour winds and get rained on all day.
Yeah.
But a buck will still roll in because I'm close to their beds. So a buck will still roll in and possibly check that scrape, especially like on a day where it's pouring the rain and then the rain stops.
Yeah.
I get bucks rolling in midday to check the scrape when everybody's out of the woods, when the rain's going to stop or the snow stops. That's when I get a lot of activity in the mountains when those fronts move on. Or pre-front. I like pre-fronts too. Pre-fronts, I get a ton of activity. Middle of, during the rut time of the year, Beau, I don't care what it's doing outside weather-wise, especially middle of the day during the rut. Worst weather, I don't care how bad the weather is, middle of the day during the rut, I'll sit all day on purpose because my oldest, most careful bucks will sense that nobody's in the woods then, and they'll move more.
You know, when you brought up about the ground blinds, I had a guy on the podcast, John Gabriel. He's from Washington, and he hunts mountain bucks, and he uses ground blinds a lot and talks about that.
I know John, and he's good. He does a good job, and he's a ground blind. Yeah, it'll. John probably talked about it, but our weather sucks out here a lot of times.
Yeah.
It's a bitch. It can be a bitch to hunt in a tree stand. Yeah. And John's good. John kills a lot of nice bucks.
And the thing is, like, too, it's like, okay, it doesn't matter how good of rain gear you have and everything else. It still just sucks getting beat on in that all day sitting in that tree, when it's like when you start getting those bad weather fronts, but you don't want to not be in the woods at that point. You might not shoot something in that, terrible rain or wind, but like you said, as soon as it stops, your traps that you have built there, they want to come in, freshen that up.
Yeah, they want to check, and especially during anything close to the rut. And another thing we deal with out here, Beau, I don't know if you run into it in Pennsylvania. You probably do late season. We get wet fog that just rolls in on top of you, and then it freezes on you. So my entire Fanatic gear will be frozen. And when I move, it makes noise because I'm iced over. My bow will completely ice over. You jump in a ground blind on those kind of days, you don't ice up. You don't have to deal with that ice on you.
That's a good point. And we don't have that as often as I'm sure that you do. I've had those times, and that's why I actually went away from using like a QAD rest that gets locked up, because I've had them where they freeze up once it gets wet and then it gets frozen there. Like I went to like a limb driven rest. It sucks because it doesn't hold it in that position there, and it kind of just laying on your rest. So I have to put a bunch of felt down, but at the same time, it doesn't have that opportunity to freeze up and get caught in that up position. And that's something to really think about. And your arrow getting all that shit on it. And that's something to definitely think about.
Well, that buck I was hunting this year that I just totally focused on, I had like 2 or 3 days like that where I had to break the ice off of my shoulders, off of my clothes, tried to do it quietly, and then get the ice off my bow to be ready for a shot.
Huh. That's crazy. And so I do want to I do want to well, actually I want to ask one more thing about the bedding thing before we move on. But all right, so you're talking about being around those buck bedding areas. As you get closer to like the rut, are your scrapes changing and your hunting spots to be focused more around does, or are you still hunting that area where you think the bucks are living at?
Yeah, that's a great question. Early season ball, a lot of times I'm building a mock early, a lot of times near a bedding zone to pull a specific buck to me to kill him. As soon as he starts moving, some of my bucks move 3 to 5 miles to a whole different drainage, and they'll camp out for a month of November, late October, all the way through November. They'll camp out on specific doe groups. So yeah, guess what I'm hunting in? Those doe group community scrapes that already have a couple resident bucks, but I'm also picking up the bucks that move that I'm trying to kill into those areas. And those bucks basically come in for a month or so and they'll service a different drainage. So yeah, I am 100% hunting more doe congregated community type scrapes with a couple local nice bucks on it usually. But because I hunt specific deer, I move with whatever the deer wants to move to and hunt those doe family groups during the rut. And then late season, I got to know where he moves back to when he's kind of done with the ladies. And then I'll move back in on him and hunt those traps, those scrapes that are basically in the face of his bedding. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does. Do you are you figuring out like where he's moving from cameras? Like, do you kind of like predict ahead of time and set up these scrapes, say in the summertime or early on, you put them out, and then so like you can go and you're like, all right, he stopped hitting this scrape. I need to move and start checking those other ones and see where he's relocated to. Is that what you're doing?
Yeah, I'm laying out this big web, and he'll always hit my scrapes if I'm close to his bedding. But as soon as he changes his bedding for usually breeding reasons or feed reasons, then I got to make sure I have a scrape there for him that he likes, and he'll always check that. And then he'll move maybe again on me for late season. I mean, it's a lot of work just to keep up with them. But when you lay out a big web, this big net, then a lot of times I'll catch him. And Beau, my nets are big. Sometimes they're 5 to 8 to 10 mile layouts, and it's awesome the information that you pick up on. Like, some of my bucks in 24 hours will put a 10-mile day on easy during the rut.
Yeah.
But what I'm focused on, Beau, even during the rut, is where they're camping out and trying to bed up for the evenings. That's my chance to kill them even during the rut when it comes to a specific deer. Now, if I'm just hunting deer, I'd hunt it a little different. But I'm trying to chase specific whitetails down and kill them where they're bouncing around to due to feed conditions, the rut coming up, the rut going, the rut ending, and then their hideouts. So it's kind of a 4 to 5 phase move around with them a lot of times. Some of my bucks are more homebodies. Some of the bucks I've killed in the past, they like where they live. They have all the ladies they want. They have everything they want right there, and they don't move a lot. So we start talking about the personality of a buck or his demeanor, and what he's willing to do to do his thing. So a lot of it has to do with the individual buck too.
Yeah, and I've seen that too here. Like, I'll have bucks that, I'm trying to find one right now that I struggle with finding early season, but I know where he's at during the rut and late season. So I'm like, okay, I need to expand my web basically and start running some cameras in different areas to figure them out, because I don't get them during the summer. I don't get them in early October, and I don't get him until like around October 25th or so. He shows up, and then he's there, and then he adjusts just slightly into the late season, but he hangs out there all late season and, even in the January. But I'm like, okay, this is like my goal this year is figuring out what is he doing early that I'm not doing and try to, hone in on that. And I was just starting it this past weekend. I was out, starting to spread some more cameras. I got the cameras in the areas I know he's in at certain times. And now I'm starting to start to break away and start webbing out on some of these different ridges and areas that might be more conducive to him living when it's warmer out and more foliage on the trees.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up. I'm doing the exact same thing with a big 5x5. I have never been able to get him pinpointed in September. And I want to kill this deer. I mean, he and I have went rounds now for a couple years. I want to kill this deer in the velvet. That's my goal. And I've never been on him early. He always moves in on me late October, all through November and into December. I have him, but I don't know him in September and August. And that's what I'm working on him right now, is a big web covering a ton of ground to try to locate him right now. I want to locate him now, and I want to kill him opening day. That's the goal. But I don't have him dialed in yet. And I've been after this deer for a couple of years. I mean, he has been very nomadic. He probably moves more and hits more of my community scrapes. And I'm not kidding you, Beau, in 3 different drainages. Three different drainages that are stacked together. Big drainage, big drainage, big drainage. I've had that sucker in all 3 during the rut.
Is this the buck that you were hunting last year that you had the opportunity at?
This is yes. Yeah. No. This is a buck that, okay. I did not shoot at. The other one I shot at last year, a big 5-point. Oh my gosh. He was one, Beau. The one that I had the opportunity at and missed last year is a buck that my son and I have both. I swear to God, this buck has 9 lives. I should have killed him last year. Tyson should have killed him the year before.
Really?
And this is a buck that for us, Beau, is pretty dear to our heart. We got sheds off of him. He's also a buck that's huntable, and instead of being 4 hours away, he's only an hour and a half away. So he's one of those bucks, and for the listeners, he's one of those bucks that I can get to and hunt a little more often. I don't have a lot of time to hunt with my son playing college football. That's just the truth. I'm not missing Tyson's ball games. So I basically cut my hunting time for whitetails down last year by 2/3.
Yeah, so and you are a school teacher, so like you're working all week. Like, you know, right now that's why you're out. You have more time to be out in the woods, but like that's and those type of travel times. Like we talked about that before, but like for anybody that's listening, Troy's not just like, you know, able to go out in his backyard and climb up the mountain and go to hunt. Like covering some serious country. That right now, fuel costs, Troy. I don't envy you for that. Like that.
Well, it's true. I literally have to make more money. I told my wife, I said, and I do a lot of things outside of teaching too. As far as, you know, I have a really cool bulldozer job that I do. I've always had that. I grew up logging with my dad, so teaching's my winter warm weather or keep me inside job in the Northwest. And then everything I do outside in the summers, I'm busy in the summers too. But at least I get to set my own schedule in the summers. Mm-hmm. You know, I'll work 4 12s and then I'll take 3 days off to do whitetail, and then work 4 12s and take 3 days off to do whitetail in the summer. So yes, I do have a lot more time. You know, summer scouting for me is huge. Why? Because I had to learn to be good at summer scouting and have great setups with the bugs, the ticks, the hot weather. I just had to do it because that's when I was afforded the time to figure it out. So for me, summer scouting, some people hate it. I absolutely love it, but it's because I've been doing it for 28 years of teaching. So 30 total years I've summer scouted. When I was, even in college, I was summer scouting. So probably 35 years total. That's become a huge part of my game. And then to factor in the amount of time I have to hunt now, I got to be good, and I got to be on that deer, and I got to get him killed. You know, I got to get him killed in my game, or I run out of time. There's only so many days I can take off. And when you're traveling, following your son play college football on the weekends, I'm not hunting on the weekends hardly anymore.
Yeah, that's That's really difficult. And I know you've done it too, where you get out of school from teaching and you'll go out and hunt an evening. Probably earlier in the season where you're able to, where the daylight's a little bit longer, but still like traveling even an hour and a half somewhere, like that's a whole ordeal there.
Yeah, I maximize my time, Beau. I hunt the early archery season. I can hunt every day. I just only get evening hunts. And then obviously I have some days that I can take off, but I strategically take full days off in that late November, early December time frame for my all-dayers. And then I hunt like crazy before daylight savings time kicks in every evening. But mornings for me are usually a day I have to take off. Yep.
Yeah, and again, especially with Saturdays being football days now and everything, like that's definitely limited your time, and I respect it. That's what you're doing, is being able to you wanting to go obviously watch your son, and he seems to be crushing it, so that's awesome, and be able to do that. So that's really cool that you do that and you prioritize that.
Oh, it's unbelievable! It's so much fun, and my oldest boy, he's out pre-fishing right now to qualify for the Idaho State bass team. So we chase his stuff too. He's trying to get to the Bassmasters one day and qualifies this. Then he goes to regionals. And if he wins at regionals, he gets a shot. So we follow all of his stuff too. But all that to say, I still make time and find time to hunt whitetails. Might watch a football game in Bozeman, Montana. Ty plays at Montana State. And then I'm in a tree stand Sunday morning after driving 6 hours back from Bozeman. And I might be 4 hours away from my house after driving 6, driving 4 more to hunt a buck up by the Canadian border. That's kind of my life. And then I'll drive up Saturday night late. There's a lot of times I drive into the woods at 10 o'clock at night, sleep in my truck in a tree stand at daylight the next morning. I sleep in my truck a lot on Friday, Saturday nights, just to get close. That way I'm not driving into the drainage of that morning. Yeah.
I'm glad you broke that down, because I want people to understand that, like, it how bad do you want it, right? How bad do you want this? And that's the perfect example of that.
We used to say back in my old high school and college football days, we used to have a saying that said, you gotta want it. If you don't want it, you're never going to put forth the effort to get it,
mm-hmm.
And another thing too is all this summer scouting sets me up to be in a location that when I go in there, I 100% know I will not hunt a spot unless I have 100% chance of killing that deer in the daylight there. I don't care what time of the year it is. So I eliminate anything that's not killable. And if it's not daylight frequency on a buck that I'm trying to kill, I'm not going to go just sit in a stand to set a stand. So this scouting right now is huge for me during the summer, getting ready for that August 30th opener, which really isn't that far away. I'm going to be hunting whitetail in a month and a half.
Yeah.
Or that's 2.5 months. Sorry. No, 2.25 months I'm hunting a whitetail. 2.25 months.
Yeah. That's insane. It is coming that fast. Thank you for listening to part 1 with Troy Pottinger. You can follow along with Troy on Instagram at MTN_man33. And also his YouTube channel, just search Troy Pottinger. You'll be able to find him there. Part 2 will come out later this week. So again, thanks for listening.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of East Meets West Hunt with your host, Beau Martonik. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit eastmeetswesthunt.com, Facebook at East Meets West Outdoors, and Instagram at East Meets West Hunt. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.